There is a moment you know well. Someone says something to you, maybe a criticism, maybe a dismissal, maybe just a look that carries more weight than words, and before you have even had time to think, something inside you is already moving. Your chest tightens. Your mind begins assembling arguments. You start constructing the explanation, the defense, the counter, the proof that you are not what they implied, that you did not mean what they heard, that you are in fact reasonable and good and justified in everything you did. You have not even spoken yet, but you are already exhausted, already somewhere other than where you are standing, already lost inside a courtroom that only you can see, arguing a case that no one else is watching. You have done this hundreds of times, maybe thousands, and what strikes you, if you allow yourself to look honestly, is not just how automatic it is, but how little it ever helps. You explain yourself and the other person does not suddenly understand. You defend your choices and the unease does not go away. You justify your reaction and somehow, mysteriously, you end up feeling more alone, more misunderstood, more trapped inside something you cannot name. The reaction was supposed to make things better. It was supposed to correct the record, restore your dignity, close the distance between how you are seen and how you know yourself to be. But it never quite does that. Something always remains unresolved, hanging in the air, heavier than before. What I want to explore with you today is not a technique for becoming calmer, not a strategy for winning arguments more gracefully, not advice about how to pause before you speak. Those things have their place, but they miss something more fundamental. What I want to examine is the nature of the reaction itself, what it is really telling you, what it is protecting, and why the instruction to simply observe, an instruction that sounds almost passive, almost irresponsible, is actually one of the most demanding and transformative things a human being can undertake. If this way of thinking about reactivity resonates with something you have been quietly wrestling with, consider subscribing. I explore these questions every week, and there is something clarifying about having a consistent space to return to when the noise of daily life makes it hard to think clearly. There is a philosopher whose work I find myself returning to again and again when thinking about the inner life, and that is Hannah Arendt. She is not typically read as a spiritual thinker. Her reputation rests on her analysis of totalitarianism, her theory of political action, her fierce insistence on the importance of public life and human plurality. But running underneath all of that is a preoccupation that feels deeply relevant to what we are talking about today, and that is the question of what it means to think. Not to react, not to feel, not to perform, but to genuinely think, to stop, to look, to let the appearance of things be present to you without immediately collapsing it into a familiar story. Arendt was disturbed by what she called thoughtlessness. She was not talking about stupidity or ignorance. She was talking about a specific kind of mental absence, the state of someone who moves through the world entirely on autopilot, driven by habit and social expectation and unreflective impulse, never stopping to ask what is actually happening here. What do I actually think about this? What is this situation asking of me if I look at it without the filter of my accumulated defensiveness? She saw this thoughtlessness as dangerous in the political realm, but I think it is equally corrosive in the private one. The automatic reaction, the reflexive justification, the constant need to explain yourself, these are not signs of passion or authenticity. They are signs of thoughtlessness in Arendt's precise sense. They are signs that something else, something habitual and frightened, is doing the driving. I know many of you watching this have never spoken aloud about how exhausting this cycle actually is. The constant monitoring of how you are being perceived. The low-grade anxiety that something you said or did might have landed wrong. The way a single ambiguous text message from someone whose opinion matters to you can occupy your mind for hours, replaying and reinterpreting and constructing responses to things that have not even been said yet. You may have told yourself this is just how you are, that you are sensitive, that you care deeply, that it is a sign of your conscientiousness. But somewhere underneath that story, I suspect there is another one. A quieter, more uncomfortable recognition that this is costing you something. That the energy you spend managing your image, defending your choices, anticipating the judgment of others, that energy could be going somewhere else entirely. So let me ask you directly, when did you last feel genuinely free of that weight? When did you last exist in a moment without some part of your mind running the courtroom simulation in the background? If you want to share, drop a comment below. Even just these words, "I'm tired of defending myself," because when you name it, something shifts, and you also give someone else watching permission to name it too. Let us look more carefully at what the reaction is actually doing. When something happens, a criticism, a rejection, a moment of being misunderstood, a situation that feels unjust, the reactive impulse arises with remarkable speed. But what is it? At its most basic level, a reaction is the mind's attempt to restore a sense of coherence and safety. Something has disrupted the story you carry about yourself and about your place in the world, and the reaction is the emergency repair crew rushing in to patch the damage before it spreads. You justify yourself because your self-image has been threatened. You explain because being misunderstood feels like a kind of erasure. You defend because to not defend feels like conceding something essential, agreeing with an unflattering version of who you are. None of this is irrational. It is, in fact, deeply human. The need to be seen accurately, to have your intentions recognized, to be understood rather than merely judged. These are not vanities. They are genuine needs. But here is what happens in the actual texture of most reactive moments. The response you generate is almost never received the way you intended. The explanation lands as defensiveness. The justification reads as an inability to accept responsibility. The defense confirms, paradoxically, the very insecurity it was trying to conceal. And so the cycle continues. The more you react, the more you create the conditions that make further reactions feel necessary. Think about a particular kind of conversation you have probably had many times. Someone questions your decision. You explain your reasoning thoroughly, carefully, with what feels to you like admirable patience. They are not satisfied, or they misinterpret something in your explanation, or they push further. You explain again, perhaps with more detail, perhaps with a note of frustration beginning to color your voice. They respond to the frustration rather than the content, and suddenly you are no longer discussing the original decision at all. You are in a completely different argument, one about your tone, your attitude, your defensiveness, and the thing that actually mattered has been entirely lost. You have experienced this. We all have. And what I want you to notice is not that the other person behaved badly, though perhaps they did, but that your reaction, however understandable, was the instrument of your own derailment. The philosopher in Arendt's tradition would call this the collapse of the space of appearance. She used that phrase to describe the space that opens up between people when genuine thinking and genuine presence occur. A space in which things can actually show themselves as they are, rather than being immediately absorbed into the machinery of our fears and defenses. When you react automatically, you close that space. Not maliciously, but inevitably. You stop seeing what is actually there and begin seeing only what your reactive mind needs to see in order to protect itself. The other person stops being a full human being with their own complexity and becomes simply an obstacle or a threat. And you stop being a full human being too. You become a defense mechanism in human form. Now observation. Just observe. This instruction sounds simple, and it is not. It is not simple in the way that standing still in a burning building is not simple. Because what observation requires, genuine observation, is the willingness to let what is happening actually happen without immediately rushing to reframe it, correct it, or escape it. It requires you to experience the discomfort of being misunderstood without immediately reaching for the antidote of explanation. It requires you to feel the sting of criticism without immediately marshalling the evidence of your own innocence. It requires, in short, a kind of courage that looks from the outside like detachment, but is actually something far more demanding. It is the courage to be present to what is real, rather than what is comfortable. Arendt wrote about thinking as a two-in-one, an internal dialogue between different aspects of the self. Real thinking, for her, was not the smooth flow of a mind that knows what it thinks. It was the friction of encountering something genuinely, letting it press against your assumptions, letting it trouble you in productive ways. Observation in this sense is not passive watching. It is an active encounter with what is. And when you bring this quality of attention to your own reactions, something extraordinary becomes possible. You begin to see the reaction as an object of study rather than as an irresistible force. You begin to notice the gap between the stimulus and the response. A gap that is always there, but that reactivity keeps you from perceiving. In that gap, something lives. Call it awareness. Call it clarity. Call it, if you are comfortable with more traditional language, something like consciousness meeting itself. When you observe your own reactive impulse without immediately acting on it, you are not suppressing it or denying it. You are doing something more interesting. You are recognizing it as information rather than as instruction. The tightening in your chest, the defensive story assembling itself, the urgent need to explain, these are all telling you something worth knowing. They are telling you where you are still identified with a particular self-image, where you are still fragile, where the wound that has never fully healed is located. A reaction is a map, but you can only read the map if you do not get swept away by it. If what we are exploring here is beginning to feel like something you want to continue examining, I want to invite you into this ongoing conversation. There are many people engaging with these ideas in the comments, asking hard questions, sharing what shifts when they actually try to practice observation rather than reaction. I create these explorations every week, not to give you answers you can apply like a formula, but to create the conditions in which your own thinking can deepen. If that sounds like something worth having access to, subscribe. Not as a favor to me, but as a commitment to yourself. And I would be honored to have you here as part of a community of people who take their inner life seriously enough to really look at it. Here is something that may surprise you. The instruction not to justify yourself is not an instruction to accept injustice. It is not an instruction to be passive in the face of genuine mistreatment or to let harmful narratives about you go unchallenged forever. There are absolutely situations that call for clear, direct communication about your experience, your limits, your truth. But notice the difference between communication that comes from clarity and communication that comes from reactivity. One is grounded and considered. The other is driven by the need for immediate relief from discomfort. One has a chance of actually being heard. The other almost never does. When you stop reacting long enough to actually think, you gain access to a different kind of response entirely. Not a faster or more clever version of the defense, but something that comes from a place that does not need defending in the first place. This is where Arendt's concept of natality becomes relevant, and I want to sit with this for a moment because it is one of the most quietly radical ideas in her work. Natality for Arendt is the human capacity for new beginnings. The fact that every person enters the world as something genuinely new, capable of initiating something unprecedented, capable of acting in ways that are not merely the continuation of what came before. We tend to think of freedom as the freedom to do what we want, but Arendt understood freedom in a deeper sense as the capacity to begin, to not simply be the product of our history, our wounds, our habituated reactions, but to bring something new into existence through the quality of our attention and our action. When you observe rather than react, you are exercising this kind of freedom. You are refusing to be merely the continuation of a pattern. You are creating, even if only internally, a space in which something other than the automatic can occur. This is not dramatic. It does not feel like liberation in the Hollywood sense. It often feels like restraint, like discomfort, like sitting with something unresolved when every instinct is screaming for resolution. But this is exactly where the freedom is located. not in the release of the reaction, but in the willingness to hold the tension long enough to actually see what is there. Consider how differently you move through the world when you are not constantly managing your image, when you stop needing every interaction to confirm that you are good, competent, reasonable, and understood. Not because you have become indifferent to how you are seen, but because you have located yourself somewhere that is not entirely dependent on external validation to remain stable. The person who does not need to justify themselves is not a person without values or a person who does not care about truth. They are a person whose sense of themselves does not collapse when questioned. They can hear criticism without being destroyed by it. They can be misunderstood without losing the thread back to themselves. They can observe what is happening, including what is happening inside them, without needing it to stop or to be different than it is. This is not an achievement you reach once and keep forever. It is a practice, and the practice is made of thousands of small moments. The email that irritates you and that you hold for 10 minutes before responding. The comment that stings and that you allow to sting without immediately building a case against the person who made it. The moment when you are misrepresented in a conversation and you let it stand rather than immediately correcting the record, noticing what that costs you and why. Each of these small moments of observation rather than reaction is a kind of training. Not a training in stoicism or in emotional suppression, but a training in what Arendt might call thoughtfulness. The habit of actually being present to your experience rather than being perpetually one step ahead of it. Managing and defending and explaining before the experience has even fully arrived. And eventually, something begins to change. Not all at once, not dramatically. But the gap between stimulus and response grows slightly wider. The automatic quality of the reaction becomes a little less automatic. You begin to catch yourself in the middle of the assembly of the defense, and for just a moment, you can see it happening, rather than simply being inside it. That seeing, that tiny increment of awareness, is where everything begins. Not the destination, but the first genuine step toward it. There is a quieter life available to you than the one organized around constant self-defense. There is a way of moving through disagreement, misunderstanding, and criticism that does not require you to spend half your mental and emotional energy on litigation. It does not require you to become someone who does not care or someone who has no needs. It requires something harder, actually. It requires you to become someone who can be with what is without needing it to immediately be otherwise. Someone who can observe the sting, the tightening, the impulse to justify, and recognize it all as information rather than as emergency. Someone who trusts themselves enough not to need constant external verification of their own goodness. You have been doing the other thing for a long time. The defending, the justifying, the explaining. Notice honestly whether it has brought you the understanding and peace you were after, or whether it has simply produced more occasions for the same cycle. The question is not meant to shame you. It is meant to open a small door. And what is on the other side of that door is not the absence of reaction, but the presence of something that was always there underneath it, waiting for you to stop moving long enough to see it. Just observe. Not as an ending, but as a beginning. The kind of beginning that, as Arendt knew, is always available to us, no matter how many times we have been carried away before.